Today I'll be doing a quick video on which Soulsborne Shadow Ring game is the worst. I'll be going over all the games starting from Demon Souls all the way up to Elden Ring and name all the good and bad things about the games, and then I will pick out two of the games that I think are the worst, with number one earning a gold medal for, being the worst. Now you might be thinking, why didn't I just use another medal ranking system, number one getting a trash can medal or something like that? Well, to be honest, the reason being is that none of these games are bad in my opinion, but even in a box filled with good things, there's always going to be those few things that aren't as good as the, other things. You know what, I'm gonna just shut up and get right into the video. Starting with Demon Souls. The pros for this games are the world and the interesting ideas it had that the other games that came after it took and improved on. Now the cons. These are the world tendency system, like not being able to get a weapon because you beat a level with white or black tendency is dumb. The narrow hallways, you can barely swing a sword without it being bounced off the wall or something, and your health being reduced every time you die. Like, come on, why would you do that? Now, the cons in this game had definitely been removed or improved upon in the future titles, and because this is the first game, I'ma count it some slack, kinda. Now, moving on to Dark Souls 1. The things that I and most people love about this game is the world interconnectivity, the atmosphere, and the level design for the most part. And the things that I and some people hated are the lack of omnidirectional rolling while locked onto an enemy, the somewhat confusing weapon upgrade system. To be fair, it's not really that confusing, just way less simple compared to the other games. And the last thing is the lack of fast travel in the early game. So far, the things that people seem not to like about this game isn't so bad. Oh, and if you're wondering why I didn't talk more about the pros and cons, that's because I already had two videos going a bit further into those things, and I don't want this video to be super long, and these points that I'm listing are not just my own opinions, but other people's as well. So yeah, let's move on to Dark Souls 2. Now, this game definitely has a lot of cons, but let's start with the pros first. The power stancing mechanic, aka double wielding, that's one. The use of bonfire aesthetics, my bad, it's always cool to be able to fight a boss again without having to start a new game. The brighter atmosphere and the PvP. Now the cons. Oh man. The terrible hitboxes, especially when you try to hit a crystal lizard, the dull looking environments, the small amount of memorable bosses, the horrible enemy placements, the fact that your health is capped when you die, and the slow combat and the slow healing. Now Dark Souls 3. Starting with the pros, the first would be the combat. It's definitely the smoothest out of all the Dark Souls games. The boss fights, in terms of gameplay, they are probably the best in the whole series. The DLC and the overall movement and controls. Now, the things that most people hated were the linearity of the game. To be honest, I didn't really have a problem with this, but this was one of the things that a lot of people hated. The dull looking early environment, the magic, and the PvP. To be honest, again, I never did PvP or use magic build, but there were a lot of complaints about those things, and the last thing being too much fan service from previous games. To be honest, none of the I've been saying to be honest so much times. Anyways, none of the cons were really that bad because overall the game was still loved by a lot of people. Anyways, let's move on to Bloodborne. The things that I and a lot of people loved about Bloodborne is the gothic / Lovecraftian atmosphere, the aggressive fast-paced combat, the trick weapons, the DLC, the bosses, the lore. To be fair, a lot of people love the lore of each Souls game, but Bloodborne's story just stood out the most to me. I don't know why. And the soundtrack. Now, the things most people hated about this game is the chalice dungeons, lack of variations in armor, having to farm heals, and the lack of great bosses in the mid-game. Again, the cons for this game definitely doesn't outweigh the pros. Sekiro. Let's start off with the pros. A more focused story, the change of setting, the combat, being able to refight bosses, and the addition of a boss rush mode. Now, the things that a lot of people hated were you only being able to use one weapon, the lack of drip, not a lot of memorable boss fights, and the confusing progression midway through the story after beating Genichiro at Ashina Castle. Now, finally, Elden Ring. The thing that a lot of people love about this game are the art direction, the boss designs, the combat, and the open world. Now, the thing people hated the most were the overtuned late game bosses, the confusing story and NPC progression, and turret being weak as hell. Now let's see which two games are the worst in the franchise, starting with second place, and that is Demon's Souls. Yes, I know it was the first Souls game, so while it got a lot of things right, it also got a lot of it wrong, but mostly because the devs at the time probably didn't know what people would like from what they wouldn't like. And as you can see, the future games definitely improved on a lot of the stuff Demon's Souls did. So while I do think it's the second worst game in the franchise, it still deserves the respect that it gets. Now, the worst game in the Shadow Soulsborne Ring franchise goes to Dark Souls 2. Come on, a lot of you probably knew this already. While there's a lot of fun to be had in this game, the cons just definitely outweighs the pros by a lot. But to be fair, this is not a bad game, and you know you're doing something good when the worst game you made is Dark Souls 2. I don't know, I heard that somewhere and I don't remember where, but it's a true statement though. Cause again, this isn't a bad game, and yeah, Dark Souls 2 is considered to be the worst Souls game. I'm pretty sure I'm not the only person that thinks that way. And yeah, that's the end of the video.